Hello everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Terror of the Autons, the first story of the 8th season of classic Doctor Who, starring John Pertwee as the third Doctor. Terror of the Autons is the 55th story overall. It's 4 episodes long and is written by Robert Holmes. So the plot of the story is as follows. The Doctor is still trapped on Earth and unable to use the TARDIS, but the Time Lords are looking out for him. They send warning that the Master has arrived, and the Doctor soon discovers that the evil Time Lord is working alongside the Destined Consciousness, controller of the lethal Auton creatures. Once again, the planet is in terrible danger. Can the Doctor and his new assistant Joe Grant save it before it's too late and the true terror of the Autons is revealed? In my opinion, Terror of the Autons is a very good story, but obviously with Spearhead from Space setting such a high standard for the Autons and to an extent the John Pertwee era. Terror of the Autons actually does try to reach that standard, but it only misses by like a few feet, to say, if I'm going to be completely honest. The production of the story was good, but it was a little bit disappointing to say the least, considering the fact that so bits and pieces are actually filmed in front of a glaringly obvious green screen, and it was quite off-putting, to be honest. And there weren't that many distinct sets used. For example, the unit headquarters and the Doctor's new laboratory, which he used until the end of the Doctor's exile. And I think they did modify the Doctor's laboratory set a few times. And I think the radio telescope set, that was quite good, and I also like the International Circus set, even though that was actually filmed on location, but it was still quite good to say the least. The direction by Barry Letts was really good, and because he was the producer of Doctor Who at the time, he actually wasn't credited for his direction, but he was actually credited for being the producer of this story and this era overall. Well, he does capture some very memorable moments, which I'll get into a bit. We have got some great action scenes, I'll give it that, such as the fights between Unit and the Autons. And then I like the incidental music of this story, such as the Bastard's Little motif, which is actually used throughout when the Master was around in this era, and it was very chill to say the least. And when he actually appears, the whole that music, when it comes up, you know that something is gonna happen. And I really liked how it was associated with the Master, well, Delgado's Master, to say the least, and I quite like that. The plot itself was interesting. I liked how they made the Autons unexclusive to mainly be mannequins, because when you think of the Autons, you automatically remember them as the shop window dummies just attacking people on the streets, as we've seen on Spared from Space and in the new series Rose. And I also thought the story was actually quite violent, and the deaths, because of the very graphic deaths. First off, we have the Autons actually shooting people. We actually see them actually getting shot, as opposed. This was actually in Spirit from Space as well, but in Rose they don't actually show the person getting shot by the Auton. But I mean, it was quite obvious, and I like the I didn't really understand why that powder bit was, why they had to have powder coming out of the Autumn's victims, to say the least. And we also had the Master killing McDermott with that plastic chair. That's, I would say, is probably the most famous scene from this story, for obvious reasons. And we obviously had that very ugly troll doll killing Farrell Sr. by just biting him in the neck, and then his wife coming in from the shitty green screen kitchen, seeing his corpse on the floor and just screaming her lungs away. And obviously we had bits when Joe was, well, no, I think the first bit was when the Doctor was being strangled by the plastic telephone cord, where the Master was actually controlling it. And then obviously a moment later we had Joe getting suffocated by the daffodils, with the plastic that was shot from the daffodils. And I actually liked how it was violent, because it definitely gave Doctor Who the edge it needed to differentiate itself from the 1960s. Plus, it also made these moments rather scary and also iconic. So, onto the acting of this story. I would say it was very good. John Pertwee was great in the story, and I do believe it's due to the chemistry that he has with Katie Manning and Roger Delgado. And I think for John and Katie, they do bring out the best in each other, and it does lead to some bits and pieces of great dialogue between the two. And I like the moment where they first meet when the doctor was working on some experiments, and Joe. So I do think it's a funny scene where Joe actually comes in thinking that, well, obviously the experiment was on fire, and then Joe unintentionally gets a fire extinguisher and ruins the project, and then the doctor pretty much reprimands her for it because he did say that what he was working actually does create more smoke than it does with fire, and he actually quickly insults her by calling Joe a ham-fisted bun vendor or something like that. It was very funny, but I loved how the doctor became fond of Joe shortly afterwards. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I think the Pertwee's chemistry with Roger Delgado made this story great. And they don't actually interact till the end of episode 3, but as soon as they meet, they really hit it off. And that was pretty cool. And I think this is probably due to the fact I think they knew each other beforehand, and we do get to see some moments of dialogue between the two later on in the Pertwee era, and obviously throughout the season as well. So up next, speaking of the devil, we have the ever so lovely Katie Manning making her debut as Jo Grant, and I think her introduction was very well done, and she does a brilliant job. Obviously, despite the fact she's not as smart as the Doctor, and she's aware of this, and Jo is very resourceful, and that's what makes Jo my favorite companion, because she knows she's not the best, and she knows she can't really fully understand what's going on in her surroundings. And obviously, the Doctor, who's obviously quite experienced in all this, obviously with the Brigadier and other characters as well, such as Benton and Yates, she doesn't really understand what's going on. She's not as smart as them, but she's very resourceful, and Jo, she's the sort of character who strives to become better herself, and I can actually relate to that. And that's one of the reasons why I love Jo so much, because she knows she isn't that great in some areas, but she strives herself to be better. And I would obviously love her character development during her time in Doctor Who. And by the time we get to her final story, she's this fully fledged character who's off doing her own stuff and decides to leave the Doctor on her own accord, and she does have her own adventures off screen. And I think this was even mentioned in the Sarah Jane adventures, when she was pretty much having her own adventures by herself and her husband, whose name I've forgotten. And then the Doctor even told Jo that even the TARDIS couldn't actually pin you down, and that's what really made me love Jo the most, to say the least. And I would actually go as far as saying that Jo Grant actually does have the best companion character development in all of Doctor Who. And the Ace, I would say, comes in at a very close second, but yeah. I really like the scene where Jo was able to sneak into the Deep Space Radio Telescope place to see what was going on, and then even though she got hypnotized by the Master a few moments later, it does lead into the episode 1 cliffhanger when she was pretty much in a hypnotized state, just standing there, and then I think when the box was brought in, and then Jo was trying to open the box, hypnotized. I think she was able to fight off Yates, and then she was like, I've got to open it, I've got to the box, and then obviously there was a bomb inside, and it was a very funny scene as well, but it also makes it very strong as well. And I love how Jo's resourcefulness actually kicks in. For example, when how she does save the Doctor's ass a few times in this story, especially when she does knock out that strongman in the circus, and how her and the Doctor were tied up in the Master's van or whatever, and then Jo was able to free herself because of her skills she learns from her escapology course, and it actually does come in handy in some other stories as well, and I like that. The Brigadier was alright, even though Nicholas Courtney was actually battling depression during the filming of this story, but he does manage to do a good job of what he was given, even though it wasn't a whole lot, but you can actually tell that there was something not right with Nicholas Courtney in this story, because one, he doesn't actually get to do a whole lot, and two, his dialogue was very limited. Obviously, they decided to cut his dialogue so he doesn't have to do too much, and he wasn't even present during location filming as well. Sergeant Benton was written okay, and he doesn't actually do a whole lot until the battle between Unit and the Autons, and we also have the debut of Captain Mike Yates. I would say he has more of a character than Benton, even though I prefer Benton, but the only reason why I prefer Benton is because what actually happens in the Invasion of the Dinosaurs and what actually happens there. And Yates is actually more boisterous than Benton, and he's actually loyal to unit until, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, and he does prove his usefulness on a few occasions, especially in the following story, and I'd say Richard Franklin did a very good job in this story, to be honest. We also had a good run of side characters such as Farrell Sr., and Professor Phillips. Even though they all died, they did actually help out the story and how it progressed. So, on to our enemies. On the topic of first appearances, we have the first appearance of the Doctor's greatest enemy, and also the Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock, the Master, played by Roger Delgado, and Delgado was great here, and I really like his Master, and I would say that Roger Delgado is actually my favorite Master because Delgado's Master is a very suave villain, and he doesn't need to probably go too over the top to be a villainous Master, especially John Sims' Master and Sacha Dhawan's Master, as we've all seen in the new series. They are pretty much very over the top, crazy to show how crazy they are. Even though I would say Sacha Dhawan actually did it better than Sim, but obviously I don't think both of them are as good as Delgado, because Delgado, he has this natural ability. He doesn't really need to be over the top, as I mentioned before, and it also makes him quite scary as well, because he's so calm in what he's actually doing. I think that's what makes the Master even more intimidating. Roger Delgado's Master is the sort of Master that will just invite you off with dinner and just kill you while you're eating your dinner. And he does kill certain characters by shrinking them with his tissue compression eliminator, the doors, plastic chairs, and the TCE, which was actually used in the beginning of the story. I think he used on one of the professors by shrinking them and putting it in his lunch, or inside his lunchbox, and that was actually quite scary, and I like that. And we also have the Autons in their return appearance. They were good here. It was a good yet surprising addition to have them talk, and that's something we didn't even see in Spearhead or in Rose. The Autons actually take the form of those big flower guys. I think this is what the Autons were in this story. Yeah, and I actually like them, not just the shop window dummies we've seen in other stories such as Spearhead, and yeah, onto the things that were quite good in this story. So, onto the things I'm not really too keen on with this story. First off, we have the absence of the nesting consciousness. Even though the DVD does mention that the nesting consciousness is there in a way, but not necessarily, because the Master doesn't mention the nesting fleet arriving, but it's not really mentioned, to say the least. But I just think that it was quite weird to have the Autons there without the heavy influence of the nesting consciousness, and it was rather pointless to have the Autons without the nesting and playing a major part in the story. And as I mentioned before, this story doesn't really match up to the greatness of Spearhead from space. So to end this review, Terror of the Autons introduces a good chunk of what made the John Pertwee era very enjoyable, but in comparison to Spearhead from Space and other stories in the Pertwee era, it does fall a bit short, so I'll give Terror of the Autons an 8 out of 10. My next review will be The Mind of Evil, one of my favorite stories from the John Pertwee era, so look out for that. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of this story and this review yourself, and let me know what you think of Terror. Sorry, I haven't said that already. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so already. Until then, see you later.